Welcome back, I'm Ethan. Today we step into Babylon, the most powerful city the ancient world had ever seen. Walk with me through the past. By the year 600 BC, Babylon had become something no other city on Earth could claim to be, the undisputed center of human civilization. Sitting on the banks of the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq, roughly 90 kilometers south of Baghdad, this was a city that commanded an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt. Under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon held between 200,000 and 300,000 people within its walls, making it almost certainly the largest city on the planet. Its temples scraped the heavens, its walls defied imagination, its gardens, if they existed, defied nature itself, and its king had crushed Jerusalem, sacked its temple, and dragged an entire nation into captivity to prove that no god was greater than Marduk and no city was greater than his. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring archaeological discoveries, ancient descriptions, and scholarly reconstructions to life, allowing us to move through Babylon as it stood at the height of its power, to walk its streets, pass through its gates, and stand in the shadow of towers that the ancient world believed touched the sky. And if you stay until the end, we'll visit these same locations today and see what remains of the greatest city antiquity ever produced. But before we enter the city, I want to stop here, on the flat, alluvial plain of Mesopotamia, because Babylon's location explains everything about its power and everything about its vulnerability. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, was where civilization itself began. Sumerians built the first cities here 5,000 years before Nebuchadnezzar was born. Writing, mathematics, astronomy, codified law, all of it emerged from this river valley. Babylon inherited all of it. The Euphrates ran directly through the center of the city, providing water for drinking, irrigation, and trade. The surrounding floodplain produced agricultural surpluses that fed hundreds of thousands. But flat land with no natural barriers means no natural defense. Every empire that rose in Mesopotamia eventually fell to an army crossing the same open ground that made farming possible. Babylon's answer to this problem was simple: build walls so massive that no army on earth could breach them. And that is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did. Approach the city from the north, the direction most travelers and armies would have come from, and the first thing you see are the outer walls. Herodotus, the Greek historian who claimed to have visited Babylon, described these walls as roughly 85 feet high and 80 feet wide, broad enough for 2 4-horse chariots to pass each other on top. Modern archaeology suggests Herodotus exaggerated, but not by as much as scholars once assumed. The outer wall circuit stretched over 10 miles, enclosing an area of nearly 900 hectares, making Babylon several times larger than any contemporary city. Behind the outer wall sat a second wall, and between them a moat fed by the Euphrates. The city had over 100 bronze gates. At its peak, Babylon was not merely fortified, it was a fortress shaped like a city, designed to absorb any siege and outlast any enemy. Standing beneath these walls for the first time, you would have understood immediately why Nebuchadnezzar believed his creation would last forever. Now pass through the walls with me and enter through the structure that announced Babylon's grandeur to every visitor, diplomat, and conquered king who approached: the Ishtar Gate. Constructed around 575 BC, the gate rose roughly 50 feet and was covered entirely in glazed bricks of deep lapis lazuli blue, decorated with alternating rows of golden bulls and dragons rendered in molded relief. The bulls represented Adad, god of storms. The dragons, Meshusu, serpentine creatures with forked tongues and scaled bodies, represented Marduk, Babylon's supreme deity. There were over 575 animal figures on the gate and its flanking walls. In sunlight, the blue glaze shimmered like water, making the entire structure appear to glow against the brown Mesopotamian landscape. Nothing in the ancient world prepared travelers for this sight. You could come from Egypt, from Greece, from the mountains of Persia, and nothing you had seen in your own country compared. The Ishtar Gate was designed to accomplish exactly one thing: to make you feel small before you ever met the king. Beyond the gate stretches the Processional Way, a road half a mile long and over 20 meters wide, paved with limestone and bordered by walls 12 meters tall, also covered in blue glazed bricks. These flanking walls were decorated with 60 lines per side, 120 in total, striding in profile, mouths open, muscles defined, each rendered in yellow, white and brown glaze against that relentless blue background. The lions were sacred to Ishtar, goddess of love and war, and they marched alongside you as you walked toward the city's heart, as though the goddess herself was escorting you forward. During the New Year festival, Akitu, the statue of Marduk was carried along this road in a grand procession, while thousands lined the route, chanting prayers and hymns. This wasn't just a road, it was a stage for the annual ritual that renewed the world, restored divine order, and confirmed the king as Marduk's chosen representative on earth. Every stone beneath your feet was a theological statement. Follow the processional way south, and you arrive at the structure that may have inspired the most famous story in the Bible. The Etemenanki, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth, was a massive ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, rising in 7 progressively smaller tiers from a base measuring roughly 91 meters on each side. At its summit, it stood approximately 90 meters tall, one of the tallest structures in the ancient world. Scholars believe this is the building that inspired the biblical Tower of Babel, built by people who sought to reach heaven and were scattered by God for their arrogance. The Hebrew exiles living in Babylon would have seen the Etemenanki daily, and for a people whose own temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed by the man who built this tower, the structure must have represented everything they feared and resented about their captivity. But for Babylonians, the Etemenanki was the opposite of arrogance. It was devotion made physical, a staircase so that Marduk could descend from heaven and dwell among his people. Same building, 2 completely opposite meanings. The difference depended entirely on which side of the conquest you stood on. At the ziggurat's base sits the Ishtar Gate, the Temple of Marduk, the spiritual center of the entire Babylonian world. Ancient records describe a golden statue of Marduk within the inner sanctuary, seated on a golden throne beside a golden table and golden incense altar. Herodotus claimed the gold in this single temple weighed over 20 tons. Even allowing for exaggeration, the Ishtar Gate was staggeringly wealthy, funded by tribute from conquered nations and offerings from kings who traveled hundreds of miles to kneel before Babylon's god. Priests performed daily rituals, read omens in the entrails of sacrificed animals, and tracked the movements of stars and planets with mathematical precision that would not be matched in Europe for 2,000 years. Babylonian astronomers predicted lunar eclipses. They mapped the zodiac. They developed a base 60 number system that survives today in our 60-second minutes and 360-degree circles. This temple was not merely a place of worship. It was a research institution, an observatory, and a treasury, all enclosed within sacred walls. Cross the Euphrates now to the western bank, where Nebuchadnezzar built his palace complex, a sprawling compound the ancient sources called the marvel of mankind. The southern palace alone contained 5 courtyards, a throne room decorated with glazed brick lions, columns of palm trees, and geometric patterns in blue, yellow, and white. Somewhere within or near this complex, ancient writers placed the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The gardens were described as ascending planted terraces, irrigated by screws that lifted water from the Euphrates to the uppermost level, creating the illusion of a forested mountain rising from flat ground. Nebuchadnezzar allegedly built them for his wife Amytis, who missed the green hills of her homeland in Media. It is one of history's most beautiful stories. It may also be untrue. No Babylonian text mentions the gardens. No archaeological evidence has conclusively identified their location. Some scholars now believe the gardens were in Nineveh, built by an Assyrian king and attributed to Babylon, because Babylon was the city people remembered. Others argue they existed exactly as described and simply lie beneath a water table that makes excavation impossible. The uncertainty is part of what makes this city fascinating. Even at the height of its power, Babylon generated legends that blurred the line between fact and myth. Walk with me now through the streets where ordinary Babylonians lived, because this city was not only temples and palaces. Residential districts were dense, organized along narrow, winding streets with houses built from mud brick, most 2 stories tall, with flat roofs where families slept during summers that pushed past 40 degrees. Rooms surrounded a central courtyard open to the sky, providing light and ventilation. Markets sold dates, barley, sesame oil, fish from the Euphrates, wool, linen, and pottery. Merchants used silver by weight as currency, recording transactions on clay tablets in cuneiform script. Thousands of these tablets survive, preserving real estate contracts, personal letters, and complaints about dishonest traders. One famous tablet contains a customer's fury over receiving the wrong grade of copper, possibly the oldest recorded customer service dispute in history. These were not abstract historical figures. They argued about money, worried about their children, and navigated bureaucracies that would feel familiar to anyone alive today. Yet for all its magnificence, Babylon's dominance lasted barely a single lifetime. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC. Within 23 years, 6 kings sat on the throne, several murdered by their successors. The last, Nabonidus, alienated the priesthood by neglecting Marduk in favor of the moon god Sin, leaving his son Belshazzar to govern a city increasingly divided against itself. In October 539 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia arrived. Herodotus recorded that Cyrus diverted the Euphrates upstream, lowering the water where it passed beneath the city walls until soldiers waded through the riverbed and entered without breaching a single fortification. The walls that had never been broken were never tested. The city fell from within. According to the Book of Daniel, Belshazzar was feasting when the Persian army entered, unaware his kingdom had already been taken at the edges. By morning, the greatest city on earth belonged to someone else. Cyrus did not destroy Babylon. He presented himself as liberator, freed the Jewish exiles, restored temples, and governed with tolerance that earned him the title Anointed One in the Hebrew Bible. Babylon continued under Persian rule, then under Alexander the Great, who planned to make it his capital before dying there in 323 BC at 32. But each successive empire drained the city of purpose. The Seleucids built a new capital nearby. The Euphrates shifted course, pulling the lifeblood westward. By the 1st century AD, Babylon was a ruin. By the 7th century, a memory. By the 19th century, European archaeologists found mounds of dirt covering mud brick walls dissolving back into the earth they were made from. Today, the ruins sit 85 kilometers south of Baghdad. The Ishtar Gate's foundations remain in situ, but the reconstructed gate itself stands in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, carried away by German archaeologists a century ago. The Etemenanki survives as a waterlogged depression, the Great Ziggurat reduced to a square outline and a reed-filled marsh. Saddam Hussein rebuilt portions of the palace in the 1980s, inscribing new bricks with his own name atop ancient foundations, a gesture revealing more about the present than the past. UNESCO designated Babylon a World Heritage Site in 2019, but conservation remains difficult, the political landscape complex, and the Euphrates continues dropping, threatening the water table that has paradoxically preserved what lies beneath. Standing here among crumbling mud brick and reconstructed fragments, it is nearly impossible to reconcile this landscape with Nebuchadnezzar's city. The blue walls are in Berlin. The golden statue was melted by a Persian king. The hanging gardens left no trace. What survives are clay tablets by the hundreds of thousands, still being translated, still revealing contracts, prayers, astronomical records, and complaints about copper. The words outlasted the walls. The records outlasted the empire. The mathematics outlasted everything. Babylon proves something every great city since has confirmed. Power is temporary. Walls crumble, rivers change course, Empires replace each other so reliably it resembles natural law. But knowledge, once created, is nearly impossible to destroy. Every time you check a clock and see 60 minutes, every time you measure an angle and find 360 degrees, you are using mathematics that Babylonian priests developed in the shadow of the Etemenanki 3,000 years ago. The city is gone. The empire is dust. The ideas are everywhere, woven so deeply into daily life that most people never realize they carry Babylon with them every single day. Thanks for watching. If there's a city or moment in history you'd like to see brought back to life, drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.